here we go.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome everyone to today's event, SOS, Going Beyond the Same Old Sources. This is the inaugural event in what will be a series of opportunities for journalists to connect with new experts and have the opportunity to cultivate a broader range of sources for their stories. This effort is part of the New Jersey Diverse Sources Database, which is a public resource that serves, sorry, I'm speaking, but also admitting people into the meeting.
I'll take it. You don't worry, I got that.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Which is a public resource that serves as one way that reporters and editors can identify diverse experts on a variety of beats across the Garden State. So when you go get a moment later today, please go to diversesourcesnj.com. Browse through the experts that we already have in the database and click on nominate a source if you have any experts in mind that you rely on that should be in the database. It's a super simple form. All you have to provide really is their name and email address so we can send them an invitation to join it. Your support is really integral to the success of that project. So we really appreciate you checking it out. Again, diversesourcesnj.com. So again, my name is Umbreen Ali. I'm the project manager for the Diverse Sources Database at the Center for Cooperative Media. We're a nonprofit and our mission is to grow and strengthen local journalism. So given that, I'm really excited to introduce you to today's panel. They're going to be talking about COVID-19 and a variety of worker rights issues based on their own expertise. Nearly 2 years into this crisis, many of us have established who our trusted sources are for information about the pandemic. But today, I hope that you will take this opportunity to learn about the work that our fabulous experts are doing and rely on them in future reporting on COVID-19 and beyond. Please treat this as an opportunity to really, build and cultivate new sources. Before we get started, I just want to give you a sense of how the next 45 or so minutes will flow. We will give each panelist a chance to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their current work. After that, we'll open it up for audience questions. As Joe mentioned, today's comments are on the record, so we encourage you to use this as an opportunity to report what you find to be newsworthy. You're welcome to enter your questions into the chat at any time, and we'll address them during the Q&A. We ask that you please provide your name and the organization you work for as well. That's just useful for our speakers. So without any delay, let me introduce you to our panelists. Today we have Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina, who is the executive director at the Worker Institute at Cornell University, but she's based here in New Jersey. And though her work is national in scope, some of it is based right here in the Garden State. So she'll tell you more about that. We also have Samira Molina, a placement and career services developer at Pathstone Corporation, which is a nonprofit that serves New Jersey's farm worker community. And finally, we have Juan Fernandez, who is owner and partner at Fernandez Garcia Law, and who has been representing individuals who died in nursing homes due to COVID-19. Because Juan has to leave by 2:30 for a deposition, I'm going to ask him to go first. Juan, can you please just tell us a little bit about yourself and your current work as it relates to the pandemic and labor issues?
Sure. My name is Juan Fernandez. I'm Fernandez Garcia. I've been a labor and employment attorney for 33 years. So it's been a long time. And what happened in March of 2020 was an incredible, had a credible stain upon what was happening in the world. But more importantly, lawyers really stopped working. And there were lots of situations where trials are not being weren't being held and aren't being held. And it was interesting that around March of 2020 and more in April of 2020, people started calling about these issues concerning COVID-19 and some of the terrible things that they were experiencing. So while the reason I'm telling you this is I was practicing for 33 years, but I quickly became an expert in COVID-19 litigation and COVID-19 issues, which was something that was completely unheard of before. For example, I had no idea what a Zoom conference was on March 15th, 2020, and now it's the new world. So it's just been an incredible change in terms of what's occurred legally, and we jumped in, and the most important thing I found out is there's a lot of people that need a lot of help in these types of cases, and The unfortunate thing is you have situations where families where you never had this before, experienced death of a close person and could not even be with them. They were in hospitals alone. The stories are gut-wrenching. Some of the things that occurred that caused those deaths are very, very troubling. And that's why we felt very dedicated to pursue those claims. And that's a little short version of who I am.
Thank you, Juan. Up next, Dr. Campos-Medina, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel and for opening the opportunities for different voices to be part of the narrative about the consequences or the impact of COVID-19 on workers or in different people in the Garden State and in the region. I'm Dr. Campos-Medina. I'm the Executive Director of the Worker Institute at the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell. Our institute focuses on applied research, academic research, and training and programming, addressing issues of inequality in the world of work, and innovating ideas for building collective bargaining rights for workers in the new economy, or for advancing issues of collective power for workers in the gig economy or in other forms of precarious labor. I live in New Jersey. I live in Hunterdon County. I'm not based out of Ithaca, which is the home of Cornell University. My office is in New York City. I'm a commuter, so I have been working from home since March of 2020. I also, though, before joining academia, which I did about 5 years ago, I spent 20 years in different roles working for labor unions, representing workers. I was the National Legislative Director for the Apparel and Textile Workers Union when we had a manufacturing industry in the United States. So I have experience with the legislative process in Congress. I was also a National Political Director for the union, Unite Here, and then, which is Hotel and Restaurant Workers Unions, and then the State Director for Unite Here in New Jersey, which represents casino workers, hotel and restaurant workers, and food service workers at the airports and along our turnpike. So I have, my experience is in the practical side, representing workers and advancing political positions and policies that empower workers. From there, I decided that I wanted to be more into the policy side. I went back to get my PhD in political science from Rutgers, Newark. So I was working and going to school. And I graduated, I've completed my PhD and joined the faculty at Cornell University in 2000, oh my God, 15, time flies. When I speak about workers' issues, when I speak about immigrant workers' issues, and I speak about voting and politics, I always speak of it from the viewpoint of low-wage workers, of working class families, and how can those type of populations build power, whether it be in the workplace or whether it be in the ballot box. So that's sort of my source. Today, I have a brief presentation of the study that we did at the Worker Institute in partnership with the National Employment Law Project and Colors of Change, actually interviewing workers of color who were employed to identify issues that they were facing at work, both in providing the service to workers and for themselves. And I don't know if this is the time or I do it next time, but I will just to share some of the findings so that when you're looking at the issues that are created in the workplace or the impact that perhaps patients in these care facilities are experiencing, you also cover it from the angle of the workers and the lack of protection, the lack of rights that they have faced during this time. And so that you were able to present both sides. So I stop there and hopefully we get back around to it, but that's sort of my view.
That's great. Yeah, and we'd love to kind of see some of the details. Before we do that, Samira, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your current work as well.
Hello, I'm Samira Molina. I'm a placement and career services developer for a nonprofit organization called Pathstone Corporation. I work under the National Farm Worker Jobs Program, a department I'm especially passionate about because I too was a farm worker. My dad migrated from Colombia to the United States and devoted his life to harvesting blueberries. So I naturally followed in his footsteps since I was 15. I did serve in the U.S. Air Force. I'm a retired veteran. It was kind of fate that I landed this position, helping families and farm workers and finding resources for them. It comes naturally, just like helping my parents translate, and it's a very rewarding position. It's intriguing going to farms all over New Jersey and meeting people that migrate from all over and seeing what they really want to achieve. And the best reward is getting them there.
That's great. Thank you so much. There's definitely a common thread in all of your work. And I want to start just by talking to Juan a little bit about the cases that you've been representing of workers who were in nursing homes during the pandemic. Can you just give us a little bit of background on the context in which they were working, and then what the legal cases you're representing now are?
Yeah, and I want to say that when I hear Ms. Campos-Medina and Ms. Molina speak about what they're doing, it's just so nice to see the people doing what I call the work of God. And I, as a lawyer, really in representing these individuals during COVID-19, have gotten to be a little part of helping them. And what I see a lot is a voiceless group of individuals who are undocumented, who are paid very little money, who are afraid to protect their rights in these types of cases. So what I saw was a lot of people reluctantly calling me and telling me that their husband, their father, had passed away at a facility as a result of COVID-19. And you hear these stories. These are individuals that are making $15, $14 an hour, who went in every day during the COVID crisis and worked, and they paid the ultimate price. And that's really the unheard voice. You hear a lot of stories about nurses and doctors, which are very important in terms of what happened, but these unheard people who are afraid to come forward with issues. And what I found now is on a lot of these COVID-19 for example, in nursing home deaths, there was OSHA violations that were cited that specifically related to individuals who were calling me on the phone, meaning there was a report that said there was an outbreak, it could have been avoided, and this person's death was a result of them not following procedures. And the unfortunate thing, especially with the Latino community, is they find it very difficult to present a case. And the unfortunate and also the untold story is the fact that the state of New Jersey and the federal government have built in various immunities which protect the institutions from liability during this time period. A very noble and proper thing to do if they were following procedures. But the problem has been that these individuals, who I thank the Lord they call me, because they tell me I've called 5 or 6 lawyers, they won't take a case because of these immunities and because of these hurdles that people would have in terms of a death. And when you have somebody who dies in your family that is supporting you and your children, it's not an easy thing to overcome. And these hurdles are preventing the legal community and a lot of lawyers from accepting these cases. And the one hurdle is obviously the immunities for nursing homes, which you have to kind of show something beyond ordinary negligence. You have to show some violations of policy, and that really makes sense. And the other hurdle I have seen is the workers' compensation bar. In New Jersey, if you are for example, a worker, and you were exposed to COVID-19 at work, you have rights under workers' compensation law, but those rights are very limited in terms of recovery. If you have a 5 or 6 year old child, there is no way you're going to be able to compensate for the loss of a parent through workers' compensation court. So in order to meet that burden in a separate cause of action, it's almost like a criminal law standard. You have to show that the entity intended to do something or was so reckless that it produced a result and an injury. And all of these hurdles, all of these people who are unheard are really the story that I think the press has not covered in terms of these cases, as opposed to someone who has the benefit, the full benefit of the legal process. They're not only cut off because of their fear of the process, but the process itself is cutting them off. And that's really, I think, the story. And I must say, being a reporter is not an easy job. I understand. And most reporters are very comfortable calling someone and saying, hey, I need a quote on this, because there's a comfort factor between the individuals. But I tell you this, especially in this case, and the panel you see here, the background, the information that you have, Miss Molina talking about, her father with the blueberry farm. We have an incredible insight to this population that really has no voice for them. And these individuals who you have here are voices, but again, I feel that they have been the individuals that have been lost in this COVID-19 process. And why I say that is I can sit comfortably in my office, I can work from home, I could do things. These people making $12 to $15 an hour went into places where they knew people were dying and worked. And when you hear stories about people saying, I had to go or I was going to lose my job, they didn't have the luxuries that we have and other people have in terms of their work situation. So, I think that when you're talking about who you're going to communicate and who you're going to get quotes from and who you're going to get information from, individuals like Dr. Campos-Medina and Miss Molina, boy, they sound like pretty good sources, and it makes the story much more compelling and real. It's a real story as to these people that really have no voice. So
thank you, Juan. I promise I didn't pay him to say that. But you're absolutely right. That is really the goal here. Thank you for sharing that information about those cases as well. If I put my reporter hat on for a moment, to me, it seems like some of the laws around how nursing homes are overseen and how workers are treated are going to change a lot in the years to come. So certainly there's a lot of stories that to be reported on in that front. Just as a reminder, all of our sources are in the database. If you need to follow up, if you want to do any one-on-one interviews on any topics that we touch on today, you're more than welcome. And then again, you can drop your questions in the chat if you have any, and I'll try to get to any that you have for Juan before he has to run. Dr. Campos-Medina, can you tell us a little bit about the study and some of the findings you have around the pandemic and workers' issues?
Yes, and I was thinking, listening to Juan and his storytelling about how he's talking about the individual stories that he has helped and he has dealt with. So what I want to, and those matter because these are people's lives, but I want to talk about is the aggregate data of what we found on a study, national study in which we interviewed, the sample was about 3,200 workers in industries that were considered essential, in the low wage industry, people who were working. So I'm gonna share those findings with you because it informs the narratives that Juan is talking about here and how they were not just here and there. It was actually what was happening in general. So I have this, and it's a long one, but I'm just going to try to give you a little sense of it, and I can share it at some point if you want to see more of it. So the name of the survey was the Just Recovery Survey, and we wanted to see what was happening to workers during the pandemic And what would it take to actually have a just recovery after we were talking about returning to work? Like I said, we partnered with Color of Change, National Employment Law Project, Time's Up, Columbia University, and us, the Worker Institute at Cornell University. We wanted to figure out what were the determinants of worker well-being during this time. And we focused our survey questions on 3 areas of worker well-being, which is health and safety on the job, which is what we were talking about earlier, the ability of workers to actually have agency and voice. That means that you are able to file a complaint and get a response from your employer, and that if you file a complaint, are you protected? And the sense of economic security. Are people getting paid? Are they being compensated for extra time? So those were the 3 areas that we focus our study on. What we found out, and these were, we focus on essential workers and workers in nursing homes and elder care, in domestic care. They were determined to be essential workers during that time. So they really did not start working like me. I had the privilege to basically buckle down and work from home. So like I said before, it was a sample of 3,100 workers with oversampling of Black and Latino workers, because they were the ones that were in the essential industries. And as you said, in the nursing home industry and the care industry, most of those workers are Black, immigrant, Latinos, and many of them are undocumented. So they were part of this example. And here's what we found. Employers and public and private sector leaders are failing people of color during the pandemic. A lot of the workers were facing wage theft, meaning that they show up to work and somehow they didn't get paid for all the hours. Some of them got stuck going to work and they didn't get, paid for the overtime that they were putting in. And this was even worse for Black workers. They really lost face high levels of wage theft during this time. And this can be fixed. We have laws that protect workers. If you work, you get paid. But what are the mechanisms for enforcing that? We also found that workers were putting their health and safety at risk, because most of the workers in this workforce that became essential, they don't have healthcare themselves. So if they get sick, they're sick, and that's it. If you, one of the stories that I like to tell about is this Haitian woman who basically, she was crying because she was stuck at a nursing home taking care of 10 sick older people. And she herself was afraid to go home because she was gonna get her family sick. But she had nowhere to complain, and she felt like she needed to take care of those older patients. But she couldn't complain about violation of health and safety because she could lose her job. So imagine having that kind of systemic force put on you, someone that takes pride in taking care of other people. So women of color who are heavily on these industries of care really bear the brunt of being responsible for caring for other people and yet not having access to healthcare themselves. Many women, and we know this is like what they call the cessation, that women are not going back to work. Low-income women are not going back to work because the jobs that are being offered are low wage, and they have to decide between childcare or care at home or going to work. So this is really taking a big toll on women. So I said that while white women are facing a cessation, women of color are facing a decession. We are going backwards in the ability of Latinas and Black women to be able to have economic stability. And that story doesn't get captured when we talk about the cessation. We're thinking about upper class, working class women like me who have a college degree and had to make that choice about whether they go fully back to work or stay home to take care of their kids. Many low-wage women don't have that choice. They have to figure out how do they make ends meet and go back to work. So I call it the decession for women of color. I'm gonna move forward because one of the big issues that really became clear to us, most workers were afraid of filing complaints or complaining about the working conditions. And in the two areas that we had the highest level of workers complaining about retaliation, about employers retaliating against them for filing complaints, was in the area of health and safety, and the ability to refuse work that was unsafe, on the ability to say you are not following OSHA protocols and I will not do this job. If they do that, they felt that they could be retaliated against and be fired. And remember, if you get fired, you don't have access to unemployment insurance. So that is, that we have to consider that. The other issue that we had, and it was very high, is that specifically women in the care industry were afraid of complaining about sexual harassment. And in these industries, it's an issue that we don't talk a lot, but there's a lot of instances of sexual harassment and women feeling afraid to complain about it during this time. Now, because of these findings, we knew this was happening. Advocates were telling us about this. At the beginning of the pandemic, if you remember, Governor Murphy in New Jersey did issue mandates for health and safety, but he did not give workers the right for those mandates to be enforceable at work. And in New Jersey, OSHA, New Jersey DOL doesn't have purview of OSHA mandates in the private sector. They only have purview of OSHA mandates in the public sector. And workers in New Jersey were dependent on the federal government to actually mandate protections for workers in the private sector. And those were the years of Donald Trump. So there was no OSHA. And even today, OSHA needs to be rebuilt. So there was this whole effort to create policy that enforces state mandates in the private sector and actually gives workers in New Jersey the right to refuse unsafe work without being penalized by losing their unemployment insurance or other benefits. So that is an issue that hasn't been resolved. So when we talk about the safety of workers in the private sector, remember, New Jersey does not, the Labor Department does not have purview over health and safety enforcement in the private sector. That's a key that a lot of reporters miss. And so that we at the local level are dependent on workers having the courage to tell a nursing home owner, I will not engage in that work because it's going to make me sick and it's going to make the patient sick. That is an area that we need to still fix. So I can go on and on. We found out that workers do want collective power, they want union representation. And basically what we need is public policy that expands whistleblower protections for workers that complain about health and safety and about sexual harassment. We need public policy that protects workers for just cause termination, that if they refuse to work in unsafe work, that they are protected because it's just cause. And of course, we defend the right of workers to join a union, and that we promote community benefit agreements every time private sector employers get big tax breaks or big tax incentives. New Jersey gave $25 billion of tax relief and money to businesses during the pandemic, yet there was very little demand for those employers to actually protect their workers through health and safety mechanisms, and to actually pay them a living wage, and to actually give them healthcare. So we have a lot to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that overview. And if anybody has any specific questions or follow-ups or want to see that presentation, feel free to reach out to Dr. Campos-Medina. I love how Juan talked about these individual cases, and then you kind of talked about the aggregate picture, and also kind of the issues that working class workers are facing. Samira, I want to bring you into this conversation because obviously agriculture is such a big part of the New Jersey economy, and the farm workers are often overlooked when we talk about worker rights issues. But tell us about that community. You know, who are the farm workers in New Jersey, and what kinds of challenges did they face during this time?
Yes, one of the main things that I have gathered from the migrant farm worker community is how unfamiliar their environment is. These are people that are coming from all different parts of the world, and all they know is the work. They don't know the resources that are available to them. They don't know the area. And all they know is that sometimes they work 7 days a week, and these necessities that they have become neglected, like whether it's assistance, transportation to goods like grocery stores, and childcare. Sometimes there are children left in the farms without supervision, and with the language barrier and educational barriers, I feel like this is they're limited to expressing how they feel, and they don't have that backup. That's where we come into place. We give them a voice. We go into the farms and we help them out. If we can't provide them assistance, we give referrals to collaborating organizations. During COVID, it was very difficult because we weren't really allowed to go out to the farms, but we did assist a lot of farm workers virtually. But again, like virtually only works towards a certain group of people. Some farm workers don't have phones. They don't have internet service. We had to teach them how to connect us to a Zoom meeting. It was very frustrating for them. Some of them, they rather the worst be over, you know, and they pick up after everything was done to continue their case. But we wanted to keep helping them. So we did what we could. And when vaccines came available, we did go out and we worked with a local clinic, Complete Care, and we got over 1,000 farm workers vaccinated, and we're still in the process of getting people vaccinated.
Samira, is your organization able to help reporters connect with individual undocumented farm workers if they wanted to do a story or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We recently just did a segment for the news where they interviewed one of our clients, how he went through the COVID process and was our client, and how he has excelled. Yeah, we're always open to interviews, reporters. We want to get as much publicity out there as possible.
Great. So I think we'll just open up the floor now to people's questions. You can raise your hand if you want me to call on you, and you can ask your question. You could also post your question in the chat and I can read it out loud. While those are starting to come in, I do see that Kimmy Way has raised their hand. So Kimmy, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So how do we set up a meeting to talk with farm workers directly?
Well, we could. What you would probably do. You can email my office, my supervisor, and we can coordinate a visit to the farms. We do have a close connection with the farm owners, and a lot of the clients are still working at the farms. So I could put the email here.
Are the farm workers that we would be in touch with people who feel that they're being fairly treated by the owners of the farms that they work at?
It depends. Sometimes. Well, what I've noticed about the COVID experience when I was living still at the farm was the housing situations. They didn't change as much. Like social distancing is kind of impossible when you're living at the farm. They did do they did better a lot of the hand sanitizing, providing different changes, but the housing remained the same. And I believe that's a topic that needs to be shed more light on. And I'm sure farm workers would be open to discuss that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
No problem.
That was a great question. Thank you for asking that. All right, as we wait for other questions to come in, I have a few of my own. Dr. Campos-Medina, I know that some of your research has to do with distribution centers and warehouse workers, and I wanted to hear a little bit about that since that's such a growing part of the economy now. Oh, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, even before, we always say that the differences in the treatment that some the low-wage workers received during the pandemic were already there before the pandemic, and it was made obvious because it was amplified during this period. And the workers that were became frontline workers during the pandemic were warehouse workers, and all of a sudden, most of us just turned to our computer and started ordering food. We started ordering stuff from Amazon. So we became more aware of where they were working and how much they were working. I remember I've been part of the Warehouse Workers Stand Up Coalition in New Jersey. And I've been supporting the workers in the organizing to force Amazon to respect the rights to organize in the New York region. So the work to improve conditions for warehouse workers has been going on for, I would say, for 5-6 years in this area. New Jersey is the second largest warehouse state after California, yet wage differentials are the 40%, comparing the region. And the health and safety conditions of workers in this area are just very, totally up to employers. Another thing that we have in that industry is that warehouses have very few direct employees. Most of that workforce is managed through temp agencies. So when Amazon says we raise our minimum wage to $15 per hour for every employee, the question that the reporter should ask them, rather than the headline is Amazon raises the wage to $15 per hour, is to tell them what's the percentage of your workforce that actually is directly employed by you. Because most of that workforce is employed by temp agencies, which is like a buffer between the corporation and the worker. So we have done a lot of work with organizations like New Labor in New Jersey that represents temporary workers. During the pandemic, I don't know if you remember, there was people were getting sick and they're actually dying, like in the warehouses at Barnes and Nobles, in the warehouses at Target, Amazon. They were actually getting sick and dying. And the reason was because there was no mandates for enforceable COVID-19 protections. And we worked really hard to put a coalition. And I think by October, it took from March to October to actually get enforceable health and safety provisions in the warehouse floor for warehouse workers. That meant that if the employers didn't provide masks, didn't distance people, didn't make sure that if people were sick, they were quarantined, didn't make sure that they got paid if they got sick and had to quarantine. Because remember, in New Jersey, paid sick leave is only 5 days. So if you get quarantined during that time, you have to be out 14 days. So, how do you make sure all those issues, we continue to elevate them for the warehouse industry. They're not solved, but as you can see, there's a lot of worker movement to organize and demand more. Now, health and safety provisions are enforceable in New Jersey, and there is a whole educational component that we were able to negotiate with Governor Murphy through the ARPA money for them to fund a training program with Rutgers University labor school. So if you ever want to understand how do you get to train workers to become enforcers of OSHA rules inside the workplace, I would recommend that you visit Rutgers, a labor center, because they are the ones who got funded to educate frontline workers on their own health and safety protections and how to go about them.
That's great.
So there's a lot of work that got done. I mean, we gotta do more to actually put enforceable rights for warehouse work in New Jersey, because it's a growing field, and very few people are talking about the high levels of lack of rights for that workforce right now in New Jersey.
Absolutely, yeah. And sorry to cut you off there. I have a few questions here, and I just want to make sure we get to them. So the first one is from Larry Higgs, and I think it applies to both of you. It's a question about how your organizations educate sources about the importance of talking to the reporters. What advice would you give workers about dealing with prohibitions that their employers have about them talking to the media? You know, sometimes workers are threatened with being fired if they speak out publicly.
I'll answer this one. When we go out to the farms, we do provide a service of health and safety trainings, such as pesticide trainings, heat stress trainings, and we make it aware to the farm workers that if there's something that they don't approve of, or that they see that's wrong, or that they're being intimidated, they can contact OSHA, and the owner of the farm needs to have that contact information available to farm workers. We want to make sure that the farm workers aren't being intimidated. And if they are, we always give out our business cards. They feel more comfortable with us because we interact with them. We speak their language. You know what I mean? They feel open to discuss. And sometimes we do have to let them know. And sometimes farmers are not open to this. But we contact we have a group of clients that are willing to do interviews, that have been in the program, like I said, and that are success stories. And yeah.
We at the Worker Institute are at the forefront, researchers and policy advisors. So most of the work that we do in the policy arena is advising community organizations, labor unions, or workers groups. So if a reporter wants to hear from a worker the impact of a research or a policy recommendation, we usually coordinate with our partners groups, and for them to identify the right person to speak, or the worker that feels empowered enough to be able to talk to the media. And that usually is a worker leader, somebody who has already feel that they're connected to a larger organization that will protect them in case that there is something that's back. So I always say, contact an organization or a union or a worker center that is connected to them, and they will find the right people for you to speak to. And perhaps if you need to go to a work site, they will take you, because if they see that representative, they're more likely to engage with you than if you just stay outside and ask questions, and they'd be like, who are you? So.
As a slight kind of variant of that question, John Mooney was asking about workers appearing on camera. I think especially maybe Samira, do you find that, that is a challenge because then they are identified, or are there kind of these individuals who are willing to speak up in both your works?
Like Dr. Campos said, there is this specific group of people that are willing to speak up, and they're open to it. They actually look forward to the reporters' interviews. We haven't had that problem.
Yeah. That's really encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, remember, before a worker speaks, they have to feel that they have to feel empowered to be able to tell their story. And that usually comes because they are part of a community group, they are part of the union, and they feel that the union would back them up if something were to happen. So, we rely a lot on those workers to have the courage to speak up in order to tell their story. And they take that very seriously, because that's a role, giving a voice to everybody else who has yet not, so we can help you find those kind of leaders to speak to.
That's great. There's a question from Skylar Vanderveer from Tap Into Elizabeth, which is a hyper-local news site in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Skylar asks, in both of your experiences, are undocumented workers and other clients working to apply to the Excluded New Jerseyans Fund? Have there been any difficulties or challenges with the application that you have been aware of?
Yes, this has just came recently to my knowledge of the Excluded New Jerseyans Fund. We have opened it up to the community and made them aware. And also, if they are having difficulties, they always can come in here and we help them with the application, especially with the language barrier.
I think that there is a whole table of community organizations processing the application and making sure that it goes through. I think it just opened recently, and there's a lot of people making sure that workers know what the requirements are to prove that you actually lost wages because you weren't able to work, because it's very specific. So we will see how that goes. If it goes as it did in New York State ran out of money in less than a month. The fund just opened up and people are applying. So we'll see how fast it goes. Just go to your community, local organizations that service that community, and they're working really, really hard with very little money to educate the public about how to apply. And I think that's the complaint that I have heard about how little resources was given to actually process the application, because that's a cost, and to help the organizations process. So I think that we'll see how that goes, but there's a lot of work, leaders working on it, and we can put you in contact with folks who are actually at the front line trying to help workers get the refund, the aid.
Great. Do we have another question from Kimmy?
What is Dr. Campos-Medina, what is that program?
The New Jersey Excluded Workers Fund. This is the fund that was set up by by the administration of Governor Murphy to provide aid to undocumented workers who did not qualify for any federal assistance during the pandemic.
Is there concern in the community that applying will identify them to ICE and make them subject to deportation?
I think that's one of the concerns that some workers do have, but community organizations have been working very hard to make sure that there's a separation between state programs and federal programs, and to make it clear to the population. The biggest concern that we have to overcome many times is that, you know, many undocumented workers had the hope of one day being able to apply for regularization. And during the Trump years, there was this message that if you will receive any type of public assistance, that you will not qualify for legalization. So that's what they call that provision, that that you have to demonstrate that you can take care of yourself. So I think that fear still exists, even for programs like rent assistance. I mean, all over the country, states have created rent assistance programs, and a lot of immigrant workers, you know, they don't sign a lease. They usually have agreements with homeowners, and even homeowners don't want, if they're immigrant workers, immigrant themselves, they don't want to apply because they fear that it might be used against them when they apply for a citizenship, for permanent residency or even citizenship. So I think that's the bigger education barrier that we have to overcome, helping undocumented workers and homeowners understand that there's a separation between state-funded programs and federal funded programs in how it impacts their application for eventual regularization of their status.
So these programs are all state programs, you're saying?
Yes, the Excluded Workers Funds is a state program. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question in the chat for Juan. Juan had to leave for a deposition, but we will share his contact information, and you can also find it in the diverse sources database if you want to learn more about his work. And then there's a question from Vashti Harris of NJ Advance. The question is there a bill proposed new state law that has been approved or is on the path to possibly being approved by the state assembly or the state governor's office or by the Senate that you feel will help undocumented workers in New Jersey? So in general, you know, from a policy standpoint, a question about undocumented workers.
We have a table that is working on policy proposals in New Jersey that will help undocumented all workers, but specifically the undocumented workforce. That's under the Time to Care Coalition and is housed under New Jersey Citizen Action. I could send you the link to their different legislative proposals that will improve the right of workers and undocumented workers to actually be protected for refusing work on their just cause. We want those protections to be made at the state level because they do have it under OSHA, but remember, OSHA doesn't have jurisdiction for private sector workers in New Jersey. New Jersey's Labor Department doesn't have jurisdiction over private sector workers. They're under the federal jurisdiction. So it's a different, higher threshold to meet to be able to prove to federal OSHA that you had just cause for not refusing work. So that's one. The other bill that we are pushing is expanded basic leave. We would like to increase basic leave to 15 days rather than 5 that we have right now. And also expansion of paid medical leave for workers that have to stay home to take care of their kids or take care of a family member. Right now, we don't have extended pay leave, and more education for workers to know that those benefits they're entitled to the benefits independently of their immigration status in New Jersey. I think that there hasn't been any studies done about how many undocumented workers have actually used sick leave, because most of the time they feel that they don't have any right to those benefits, so a lot of them are not using it. So I think those three, if we were able to do that, I think we will be able to actually significantly help undocumented workers, and especially women, working class women who lives in these neighborhoods. But I'll provide the link for the Time to Care Coalition.
That's great. Samira, did you have anything to add to that question?
No, I think Dr. Campos kind of hit the nail on the head.
Okay, great. If there's anybody who hasn't had a chance to ask a question and wants to ask one, feel free to unmute yourself. Kimmy, I see that you have a follow-up, so feel free to go.
Thanks. So I just want to know anything that any comments that you can share that speak to the new law allowing undocumented immigrants to have driver's licenses. I'm interested, for example, in how the push to transfer to a real ID system in New Jersey is going to impact that that law that allows them to have licenses. Is it going to forbid them from having them when the real ID goes into place fully?
I think that the real ID already took place. It's already a law in New Jersey. And part of why we had to negotiate with the Assembly and the Senate, the language on the driver's licenses before it got signed was because it needed to comply. We needed to differentiate between an ID that allows you to access federal transportation, which means an ID that allows you to fly, which has to comply with real ID regulation, and an ID that only allows you to drive, and it's just in the state, you can cross a state line, but it's just a driving ID. It's not an ID that will give you access to the airline. So we needed to come to an agreement on that language, and Assemblywoman Quijano really did a good job of driving those negotiations. So the driver's license law in New Jersey for the undocumented only allows you to drive and identify who you are, and allows you to not be stopped and put in jail because you don't have identification and proof of having a license. It doesn't allow you to fly. It's not a federal ID. It doesn't comply with real ID. There's a differentiation. And all that happened at the same time during the pandemic. So the biggest crisis was how do you reorganize the DMV so that it's able to at the same time that it was provide real IDs for all New Jersey citizens, also create a different track of driver licensing. I think that DMV is still having a hard time fulfilling both demands, but I think that they have made great strides since the beginning of launching both programs.
Oh, okay, terrific. Thank you. By the way, the real ID, even though it's a law, but it's been deferred in New Jersey, so it's not full compliance with it yet.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, if there's any more questions that we haven't gotten to, I'll just pause for a moment to let people unmute themselves and ask. Okay, well, I want to thank the panelists and our audience for joining us today. We're going to be following up with a survey to get feedback on this event, since this was just our pilot run with it, and whether you'd like to see more of its kind. So please look out for that and respond to it. We'll also include the contact information for the speakers who spoke today, if there was anything you wanted to follow up about. And please remember to check out diversesourcesnj.com as a resource for you to connect with experts, including these amazing panelists that we heard from today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.